Quick warning before we begin today for those who are susceptible to seizures caused by visual stimuli. See, this video features some footage with flashing lights, glitchy images, and quick cuts with overlays that also may have quick cuts. I tried to edit around these visuals as much as I could, but at the end of the day, this is still a video about an industrial band, so flashing lights kind of go with the territory here. So if you have a history of seizures caused by visuals, view today's video at your own discretion. Thank you. Okay, so here's some behind the scenes info on my previous video, which was about Linkin Park. See, the Linkin Park episode was originally going to be much longer, as I was planning on using other bands as examples who had lost important band members in tragic fashion and thus disbanded, and then eventually reformed with new band members replacing the deceased ones. One of these examples would show why that respective reunion didn't entirely work, that one being Pantera, whereas the other example would showcase why that respective reunion did work and feel tastefully done, that one being Static X. But I eventually cut both of the Pantera and Static X portions out of the script when it became apparent that I had way more to say about them than I did with Linkin Park, which is a problem considering that Linkin Park was the original subject of the video. Oops, my bad on that one. So essentially, I decided to just release a short Linkin Park video and then eventually do a couple separate videos at a later time on Pantera and Static X, with today's video being on Static X. But then again, you probably already knew that, given that Static X is in the goddamn title of today's video. But hey, I just wanted to explain that regardless, because unlike the unimpressed cosmic nature of the vast expansive universe that always tells us to go eat a double f***er sandwich whenever we're at our lowest moments, I care about you. Especially if your name is I love you. For y'all, I just wanted to elaborate on the inner workings of my creative juice flow. I wanted to explain things. But anyway, let's get to the point of this video, which is Static X and why their somewhat recentish reunion is, as I personally believe to be, one of the best versions of a metal band reuniting after a tragedy had befallen its most important member. If anything, the modern version of Static X is among the greatest examples of a metal band reunion that was all simultaneously being respectful to the legacy of the deceased band member, continuing to create high quality music, and have the new band member replacing the deceased one fit the band's sound like a glove, both stylistically and thematically. Juggling all these key aspects to a successful reunion, like how pro Mortal Kombat players juggle hapless fools who don't know how to play the game very well, which is me. I'm the hapless fool here. Static X just handled its reunion impeccably well. But before we talk about the reunion, let me briefly discuss the history of Static X as well as its late frontman Wayne Static. See, Wayne Static, born Wayne Richard Wells, and drummer Ken J's prior band Deep Blue Dream had disbanded sometime in the late 80s or early 90s. And Deep Blue Dream is notable because not only was it Wayne Static's first band, but also because it briefly featured the guitar talents of Billy Corgan, yes, that Billy Corgan, the voice and creative force behind the Smashing Pumpkins, in 1987 and 1988. In fact, Corgan would idolize Wayne to the point that the rest of the band referred to Corgan as Little Wayne, no relation, which is just adorbs. Yet despite this, Corgan would eventually leave Deep Blue Dream in order to make his other band, the Smashing Pumpkins, his full-time priority, which in hindsight was the correct decision because that success speaks for itself. But anyway, the point is that Deep Blue Dream eventually disbanded and Wayne and drummer Ken J moved from Chicago to LA and then formed the band that would later be known as Static X and eventually featured the core lineup of the aforementioned Wayne and drummer Ken J alongside bassist Tony Campos and lead guitarist Koichi Fukuda. Additionally, also at this time, Wayne also changed his stage name to Wayne Static in order to match the band's moniker, because branding is important. Just ask Disney or anybody on YouTube really. And Static X was especially interesting because it was very different from Deep Blue Dream. See, where Deep Blue Dream was a new wave project with pop rock sensibilities, Static X was a fusion of industrial metal and nu metal, a sound that the band and its fans were refer to as evil disco, featuring a lot of metal screams, heavy riffs that are fun to jump to, late 90s and early 2000s style of vocal hooks, and instruments that kind of sounded like machines, because industrial, meaning that a comparison between the two bands was less apples to oranges and more competitive open water swimming to great white shark. There was just a big difference here in terms of sound and style. However, with that being said, many of y'all uninitiated in the art of metallic angst might be wondering, how good is Static X? After all, they started deep in the throat of nu metal's down-tuned heyday, which then begs the question, were Static X one of the good nu metal bands, or one of the bad nu metal bands? Because while this style of metal became genre non grata after the nu metal genre collapse in the late 2000s and eventually resurged in popularity in the late 2010s and the 2020s, there have been many retrospectives on the bands of that era regarding what has aged really well and what really didn't. Hell, I'm even now part of those retrospectives, both with this video and with my episode about Korn's self-titled debut, because I'm part of the algorithm now. May the content last forever. And to answer those earlier questions, the ones asking whether or not Static X is good, a resounding yes is the only adequate response. I mean, re-listening to their whole discography recently, how could it not be? The riffs are fast and ferocious, the industrial elements add dimension to the band's nu metal sound, and the quality is consistent. All to the point that it's easy to see why Static X were able to sign to a major record label and transform this band into a long-term project. Maybe not necessarily a festival headliner, but still a group where these musicians could make a sustainable career by continuing to make quality, heavy, and awesome music that fans remember fondly to this day. They just struck on something here. And Static X weren't a flash in the pan either, because let's be clear here, Static X's first 4 albums are excellent and are packed with banger after banger. In fact, 2001's Machine, 2003's Shadow Zone, and 2005's Start a War are filled with awesome industrial-tinged nu metal ragers. And 1999's Wisconsin Death Trip, Static X's debut album, is respected and in the pantheon of all-time nu metal classics. I mean, it's basically their best album. It rules. And while 2007's Cannibal and 2009's Cult of Static, Static X's 5th and 6th albums respectively, aren't as good as the first 4 that preceded them, these albums do still have their merits. Even Cult of Static, which is often considered to be the worst Static X album, because honestly, I have a soft spot for the album opener Lunatic, which I can't help it. Good song is good, I'm gonna start a circle pit at the old folks' home. But regardless, Static X is overall a good band, for both the earlier stated reasons, but even more importantly, because of Wayne Static. See, aside from playing rhythm guitar, Static's voice is very unique and lends itself incredibly well to the sound that Static X strives for. Static can scream and clean sing, all while changing his vocal speed and cadence on a whim to match with the fast riffs being played. Static was just very talented to the point that he has always been the most iconic member of Static X, music-wise because his vocal ability and visually due to his iconic hairdo that adds an extra 6 inches to his height, the type that more short kids need to adopt so that they can cheek the theme park system and be allowed to ride roller coasters, as well as thematically given that his stage name features, for the most part, the name of the band itself. As I said, Wayne Static was really iconic. Unfortunately though, Wayne Static also had his personal struggles. Despite his immense talent, the man had a big drug addiction problem, and one that continually pushed other band members away from him, as well as the later days of the band having a toxic environment that caused the various personalities within the band to no longer really vibe with each other anymore, thus causing numerous lineup changes within Static X to the point that in 2012, and after a brief hiatus at that, Wayne Static was the only remaining original member of the band, ultimately leading to a band breakup in 2013, and even more tragically, Wayne Static dying at the age of 48 in 2014, with a coroner report describing his cause of death being due to quote, a mixed prescription drug, oxycodone, hydromorphone, alprazolam, with alcohol toxicity, which occurred in hours, due to chronic prescription drug and alcohol abuse, which occurred over years, end quote. So yeah, the story of Static X and the passing of its frontman, Wayne Static, was tragic. A horrific end to a great musician, and more importantly, a beloved person, which of course begs the question, if past members of Static X were to reunite under the Static X name, what would be the best way to do that? How would they tastefully honor the legacy of Static X's most important member, all while also continuing forward in making quality new music that honors the memory of Wayne Static? And to answer, they did it in the most imaginative and inventive way possible, a route that respects Wayne Static's memory, all while going on tour and making new music. And what happened was that in 2018, original Static X members Ken J, Koichi Fukuda, and Tony Campos decided to reunite Static X, both by doing live shows and by announcing a new album, which eventually released in 2020, that was called Project Regeneration Volume 1, which was originally set to feature a bunch of guest vocals from famous singers of other bands like David Draymond of Disturbed, Ivan Moody of Five Finger Death Punch, and such, but the remaining members of Static X ultimately nixed that idea in favor of both having a new lead singer, more on that in a second, and by featuring discovered vocal tracks Wayne Static had recorded prior to his death. While sure, having a touring vocalist sounding akin to Wayne Static that can also help contribute to the album, albeit in a minor way, and using Static's old but unused vocal tracks were always part of the plan, the new lead singer ultimately became more notable in the absence of songs featuring guest vocals. As I said, more on that in a second, and the band, awesomely enough, discovered more Wayne Static recordings than they originally thought that there were, and thus decided to focus on those said recordings instead, rather than guest appearances. The band opted to use as many of Static's vocal tracks as they possibly could, some of which were very damaged to where the band and others went through lengthy and painstaking efforts to recover them. It was a true labor of love, one that reflects a statement Tony Campos made a short time after the reunion was initially announced. Yes, even before the band found more Wayne Static vocal recordings to further champion their authentic evil disco sound, because ensuring that this reunion happened was something that Campos felt very strong about from the start. Per a later portion of the statement, making this record with Ken, Koichi, and our friends, and bringing this to all of the fans is the best way that I can think to express my love, my respect, and my admiration to my old friend. Having personally reached out to Wayne's family and gaining their blessing, I feel like this is the right way to celebrate and remember who Wayne truly was, and all the good times we had together. This is the send-off Wayne deserves." End quote. Furthermore, some tracks on the LP featured the work of a new lead singer who sounds similar to Wayne Static and goes by the stage name of Xero. The reason for this stage name is that the singer is anonymous, though people have figured out who it is, but then again, I'm not going to say their name because it's just more fun this way, for obvious reasons, and wears a mask and costume that looks like the reanimated cyborg corpse of Wayne Static, meaning that whether on the audio, in the music videos, or in the live shows, Xero represents Wayne Static in the idea that even in death, his legacy carries on, that even in death, Wayne Static's spirit still remains with Static X, which is very cool, and that's even before how the music in Project Regeneration Volume 1 both uses the Wayne Static-esque voice of Xero, as well as old recordings from Wayne Static in order to hammer home the science fiction idea that Static has come back from the dead like a nu metal cyborg Jesus, that his spirit, just like his literal voice, has been resurrected through the means of technology, which is just industrial as It also helps that the music within Project Regeneration Volume 1 is very good. Hell, I'd argue it's one of the band's best albums. It's fantastically paced, the riffs always pack a punch, the production is crisp, some of the songs establish a gothic tone, and the vocals from Xero on a banger like Terminator Oscillator and hearing the late Wayne Static's voice on a great track like All These Years makes for an overall seamless experience that honors the memory of Wayne Static. Project Regeneration Volume 1 is just a great LP, possibly their second best behind Wisconsin Death Trip, which is high praise. And the strength of the album is important to note. After all, when bands undergo important lineup, visual, and or stylistic changes, the said bands often make a concerted best effort to ensure that their first album post-change is of high quality, mostly because it gives these said new important lineup, visual, and or stylistic changes legitimacy. It helps carry the water like a headbanging heavy metal camel performing its last rites before entering a wall of death metal. And when it comes to this, lead singer changes are especially notable, as we've seen with Killswitch Engage or with Arch Enemy's first efforts post-change, that give validity to their new singers and new incarnations of their respective bands by creating music that just kicks the listener in the ass, perfectly inserting a boot into our anuses with one clean stroke. As I said, singer changes are especially notable, and that's important to note when discussing Static X's Project Regeneration Volume 1, considering that prior to the release of the album, when Static X announced their reunion and a little later on eventually revealed their new frontman wearing a Wayne Static costume. Some critics and pundits thought that this type of reunion of Static X was in poor taste, which without really having the eventually revealed concrete information about how Static's remaining family were reportedly on board with Static X's reunion, as well as with how the band would use Static's likeness when it came to the band's new costumed frontman, is fair in terms of having an immediate knee-jerk reaction to it. I mean, come on, Wayne Static is now essentially Robo-Frankenstein here. And that's even before mentioning that Wayne Static's relationship with many of his band members had ended on rocky terms, though Tony Campos did clarify that he wishes that he and Static could have reconciled their differences before Static had passed. Because, you know, he still viewed and still does view Wayne Static as being his friend, which is good information to have. It's just that when it comes to an immediate reaction, without knowing every detail or how the reunion would eventually be executed, some criticism was understandable here. But in 2020, after the release of Project Regeneration Volume 1, we can at last see the whole fulfillment of the Static X reunion's creative vision, one that sonically and visually complements each other by utilizing Static's likeness in live shows and music videos, as well as past audio recordings to essentially revive the spirit of Wayne Static on Project Regeneration Volume 1. Because true to the title of the album, Static X thematically regenerated Wayne Static in order to honor his legacy. Project Regeneration Volume 1 just helped validify the modern version of Static X. To conclude, Static X's current formation is one of the best continuations of a great band that lost its most important member due to a mortal tragedy. In the years since Project Regeneration Volume 1, Static X have continued to tour with Xero, have won over fans through their presentation and great execution of concept, and even released their 8th studio album in Project Regeneration Volume 2 in 2024, with more recordings of the late Wayne Static. And while Project Regeneration Volume 2 doesn't reach the heights of Volume 1, Volume 2 is still pretty good. And all this complements the fact that the subsequent live shows featuring Xero nevertheless symbolizes the valid continuation of Static X, mostly because the remaining band members understood the assignment. They understood that Wayne Static was the most important member of Static X, and the band made his visual likeness, vocal style, and even voice inseparable from the new version of the band. If anything, Static, even though he has left this world, is intrinsically tied to the modern incarnation of the band, because even in death, Static still lives on through the music. Static still remains at the heart of Static X.